The date is March 8, 1967, Mekong Delta, South Vietnam. A Viet Cong squad leader named Tran is positioned in a tree line 800 meters from a canal. He is watching an American patrol boat moving slowly through the water. The boat is a PBR, patrol boat, Riverine. 31 feet long, fiberglass hull, twin diesel engines, crew of 4. Tran has ambushed boats like this before. The tactic is simple. Wait until the boat is in the kill zone. Open fire with AK-47s and RPGs from the tree line. The boat crew will take casualties. The boat will withdraw or run aground. The Americans will call for helicopter support. By the time the helicopters arrive, the Viet Cong will be gone. Tran has executed this ambush pattern a dozen times against ARV in river patrols. He expects the American boat to react the same way. The boat is approaching the kill zone now. Tran raises his hand. His squad prepares to fire. The boat enters the kill zone. Tran drops his hand. The signal to fire. His squad opens up with automatic rifle fire. Rounds hit the water around the boat. Some hit the fiberglass hull. The Americans should be taking cover now. The boat should be turning to withdraw. Instead, something on the bow of the boat rotates. It is a weapon mount. Twin barrels, heavy machine guns. The barrels are larger than anything Tran has seen on a patrol boat before. They are aimed directly at his position. The guns open fire. What happens next will be described by Tran in a report he writes 3 days later after he escapes from the area. The trees around his position explode. Not from grenades, not from RPG backblast, from bullets. Bullets the size of his thumb, moving so fast they are ripping through palm trees, shredding the trunks, splintering the wood, turning the tree line into a storm of flying debris. The sound is continuous, not the crack of rifle fire. A roar, a sustained hammering that does not stop. The weapon is firing so many rounds so fast that individual shots cannot be distinguished. It is one continuous noise, like cloth tearing, but louder than anything Tran has ever heard on a battlefield. 3 of his men are hit in the first 5 seconds, not wounded, dismembered. The rounds are so large and moving so fast that they are removing limbs. A soldier to Tran's left is hit in the chest. The bullet goes through him and through the tree behind him and keeps going. The soldier collapses. There is a hole in his torso the size of a fist. Tran orders a retreat. His squad runs. The guns on the boat track them. Rounds are chasing them through the jungle, hitting trees, exploding through bamboo. One of his men tries to take cover behind a termite mound. The rounds punch through it. The soldier is killed. The mound provides no protection. Tran makes it 400 meters before the firing stops. Of his 12-man squad, 7 are dead. 2 are wounded badly enough that they cannot walk. Tran and 2 others are unwounded but shaken. They leave the dead and the seriously wounded and continue running. That night, Tran writes his report. He describes the weapon on the American boat. He estimates the caliber. He describes the effect. He notes that nothing his squad used for cover stopped the bullets. Trees did not stop them. Mounds did not stop them. The weapon fired faster than any machine gun he had seen. It had range that exceeded his squad's AK-47s by hundreds of meters. And it was accurate enough that the American gunner could track running targets and hit them. The report reaches Viet Cong Regional Command within a week. It is not the first report describing this weapon. It will not be the last. The Americans have brought something to Vietnam that the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong are not prepared for. A machine gun so powerful that it changes the tactical calculus of every engagement. The weapon is the M2 Browning, caliber 50. And the Vietnamese have no counter for it. This is not a story about a machine gun. It is a forensic examination of what happens when one side brings a weapon to the battlefield that renders obsolete all the tactical assumptions the other side has developed over decades of fighting. It is the story of how the M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun, designed in 1921, became one of the most psychologically devastating weapons the United States deployed in Vietnam. And it is the story of why North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong forces, who had developed tactics to counter French and earthen machine guns, were shocked to discover that the American .50 caliber was not a machine gun in the conventional sense. It was a weapon that could destroy vehicles, collapse buildings, and kill soldiers through cover that should have protected them. To understand why the Vietnamese were shocked, you need to understand what they expected. Because their expectations were based on 20 years of experience fighting a different kind of machine gun. Part 1. the machine guns that came before. Let's be precise about what machine gun firepower looked like in Indochina before the Americans arrived with the M2. Because the Vietnamese understanding of machine gun employment was not theoretical. It was based on extensive combat experience against French forces from 1946 to 1954 and earthen forces from 1955 onward. The French Expeditionary Corps in Indochina used primarily the Mach 31 machine gun, caliber 7.5 mm. The weapon was effective, belt-fed, air-cooled, rate of fire approximately 500 rounds per minute, effective range approximately 800 meters against point targets. The round it fired was comparable to standard rifle ammunition, lethal, but not armor-piercing, not capable of penetrating heavy cover. Viet Minh forces learned how to fight against the Mach 31. The tactics were documented in training manuals that were later inherited by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. The tactics were based on understanding the weapon's limitations. Maximum effective range, 800 meters. Beyond that range, accuracy degraded significantly. Rounds could be stopped by substantial cover, tree trunks, earth berms, stone walls. Soldiers taking cover behind these obstacles were relatively safe. The Viet Minh developed a tactical pattern. Engage French positions from beyond 800 meters with rifles and light machine guns. Force the French to respond. When French machine guns opened fire, observe their positions, maneuver around the flanks outside the machine gun's effective range. Close the distance using cover. Assault when close enough that French machine gunners could not traverse fast enough to engage multiple targets. This pattern worked, not perfectly. The French inflicted heavy casualties, but the Viet Minh learned that machine guns were not invincible. They had range limitations, they had traverse limitations, and they could be countered by soldiers who understood those limitations and used terrain intelligently. When the Americans began deploying combat forces to Vietnam in 1965, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong assumed American machine guns would function similarly to French machine guns, larger, better supplied with ammunition, but fundamentally the same weapon system with the same limitations. This assumption was catastrophically wrong. The Americans were not using weapons comparable to the Mach 31, they were using the M60, which was roughly equivalent, 7.62 mm, similar effective range, similar penetration characteristics. Vietnamese forces could counter it using the same tactics they had used against the French, but the Americans were also using the M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun. And the M2 was not comparable to anything the Vietnamese had encountered before. Part 2. The weapon that broke the rules. Here is what the M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun was designed to do. Because understanding the design intent explains why the weapon had the effect it did when employed against infantry in Vietnam. The M2 was developed by John Browning in 1918 specifically to counter German aircraft in World War I. The United States military needed a weapon that could penetrate aircraft fuselages and disable engines from the ground. This required a round significantly larger and more powerful than standard rifle ammunition. The result was the .50 BMG cartridge, Browning machine gun, 12.7 mm by 99 mm. The bullet weighs 661 grains. For comparison, a standard 7.62 mm NATO rifle round weighs 147 grains. The .50 caliber bullet is 4.5 times heavier. Muzzle velocity is 2,910 feet per second. The kinetic energy at the muzzle is over 13,000 foot-pounds. A 7.62 mm NATO round produces approximately 2,600 foot-pounds. The .50 caliber has 5 times the energy. What this means in practical terms is that the .50 caliber round was designed to destroy things, not just kill people. It was designed to penetrate aircraft aluminium, vehicle armor, concrete, masonry. The round was engineered to defeat hardened targets at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The M2 machine gun itself is a belt-fed, air-cooled, recoil-operated weapon. Weight is 84 pounds for the gun. The tripod adds another 44 pounds. Total system weight is 128 pounds. This is not a weapon an individual soldier carries. It requires a crew. In Vietnam, the M2 was mounted on vehicles, boats, helicopters, and fixed defensive positions. Rate of fire is 450 to 600 rounds per minute depending on the model and how the headspace is adjusted. Effective range against point targets is 1,800 meters. Maximum range is over 7,000 meters. The weapon can fire sustained bursts for extended periods if the barrel is changed regularly to prevent overheating. The ammunition comes in multiple types. Ball ammunition for general purpose, armor-piercing incendiary for hardened targets, tracer rounds for observation. In Vietnam, the standard combat load mixed ball and API rounds in a 4-to-1 ratio. Every fifth round was armor-piercing incendiary. This combination gave the gunner the ability to observe his fire with tracers while ensuring that hardened targets would be penetrated by API rounds. Here is the critical difference between the M2 and the machine guns the Vietnamese had encountered previously. The M2 was not designed to suppress infantry. It was designed to destroy vehicles and fortifications. When it was used against infantry, the effect was disproportionate. A weapon designed to punch through half an inch of armor plate was being fired at soldiers hiding behind trees and mud walls. The trees and mud walls did not stop the bullets. They did not even slow them down significantly. The .50 caliber round would hit a tree trunk, penetrate it, exit the other side, and continue traveling with enough energy to kill a soldier on the opposite side. Mud walls were punched through. Sandbag bunkers were penetrated. Cover that would have protected a soldier from rifle fire or even 7.62mm machine gun fire provided no protection against the .50 caliber. This shocked the Vietnamese forces who encountered it. They had 20 years of experience using cover to protect themselves from machine gun fire. That experience was invalidated. The tactical patterns that had worked against the French no longer worked. Cover was not cover. Distance was not safety. The M2 could engage targets at ranges where the Vietnamese could not effectively return fire. Part 3. The employment that multiplied the shock. The M2 was not just devastating because of its ballistics. It was devastating because of how the Americans employed it. The weapon appeared on every platform the US military used in Vietnam, and each platform multiplied the psychological impact. Ground vehicles. Every M113 armored personnel carrier had a .50 caliber mount on top. When infantry companies moved through the countryside in APCs, they had organic .50 caliber support. Viet Cong ambushes that would have suppressed earthen units with rifle and light machine gun fire were met with .50 caliber response. The ambushing force would take casualties immediately. Trees providing concealment were shredded. The psychological effect was immediate. The Viet Cong would break contact and withdraw. Gun trucks. The Americans converted standard 2.5-ton cargo trucks into fighting vehicles by adding armor and mounting multiple M2 machine guns. Some gun trucks had 3 or 4 .50 caliber guns. These trucks escorted convoys. When the convoy was ambushed, the gun trucks would maneuver toward the ambush and engage with overwhelming firepower. A single gun truck could deliver the equivalent firepower of an entire infantry platoon's worth of light machine guns. But with the penetration and range of the .50 caliber, riverine patrol boats, the PBR that Tran's squad ambushed was standard. Twin .50 caliber machine guns mounted on the bow. Single .50 caliber or M60 mounted on the stern. The forward guns were in a rotating turret. The gunner had 360-degree traverse. When Viet Cong forces ambushed from the riverbank, the PBR would engage immediately. The .50 caliber guns had the range to reach ambush positions hundreds of meters from the river, the penetration to punch through vegetation and berms, the rate of fire to suppress multiple positions simultaneously. Helicopters. Some Huey gunships mounted the M2. More commonly, the heavier Chinook and Sea Stallion helicopters used them for defensive armament. The psychological effect of receiving .50 caliber fire from a helicopter was documented in multiple prisoner interrogations. Vietnamese soldiers described it as impossible to fight against. The helicopter was moving. The gun was firing from above. Cover that protected against ground fire did not protect against fire from elevation. Soldiers in trenches or foxholes were vulnerable. The only defense was to hide in bunkers or tunnels and wait for the helicopter to leave. Fixed positions. Every American firebase had multiple M2 positions, usually 4 to 8 guns positioned around the perimeter. At night, these guns would fire predetermined defensive fire missions. Any North Vietnamese or Viet Cong force attempting to assault the firebase would move through .50 caliber fire. The guns were pre-registered on likely avenues of approach. When ground sensors or observation posts detected movement, the .50 caliber guns would engage. The effect on attacking forces was catastrophic. Soldiers advancing through elephant grass would be hit by rounds that did not just wound, they killed through hydrostatic shock. A round passing close to the torso could kill through overpressure, even without direct impact. The cumulative effect of this employment pattern was that Vietnamese forces could encounter .50 caliber fire in almost any tactical situation. Ambushing a convoy, attacking a firebase, moving along a river, operating in areas where helicopters patrolled. The weapon was ubiquitous, and there was no tactical counter that worked consistently. Part 4. The specific engagements that defined the fear. Here is what .50 caliber fire looked like in specific engagements in Vietnam. The details are documented in after-action reports, medical records, and prisoner interrogations. The pattern is consistent. Vietnamese forces attempting to use standard infantry tactics against positions with .50 caliber support took disproportionate casualties and were forced to withdraw. Example 1. November 1966. Tây Ninh Province. A Viet Cong battalion attempted to overrun a special forces camp defended by American advisors and Montagnard strikers. The camp had 2 M2 machine guns positioned on the perimeter. The Viet Cong assault began at 2 a.m. Approximately 400 attackers moving through the wire in human wave formation. Standard tactic: overwhelm the defenders through numbers. The M2 guns opened fire. Sustained bursts, tracers every 5th round. The gunners could see the impact points. They walked the fire into the assault waves. Viet Cong soldiers were advancing through a field of elephant grass. The grass provided concealment but not cover. The .50 caliber rounds were punching through multiple soldiers per shot, single rounds hitting 3 or 4 men in line. The assault stalled after 3 minutes. The Viet Cong had taken over 100 casualties. The psychological effect of watching soldiers ahead of you being torn apart by fire you cannot locate or suppress is devastating. The assault broke, the survivors withdrew, the camp held. The Special Forces After-Action Report noted that the M2 machine guns had fired approximately 3,000 rounds combined. Approximately 100 Viet Cong killed or wounded. The weapons had been the decisive factor. Without the .50 caliber guns, the camp would likely have been overrun by sheer numbers. Example 2. April 1968. Mekong Delta. A Navy SEAL team was extracted from a reconnaissance mission by PBR. The PBR was moving through a narrow canal. Viet Cong forces initiated an ambush from both banks simultaneously. Approximately 80 fighters, RPGs and automatic weapons. The PBR's forward .50 caliber guns engaged the right bank. The stern gun engaged the left bank. The engagement lasted approximately 90 seconds. The .50 caliber guns fired an estimated 1,200 rounds total. The PBR took multiple AK-47 hits to the hull but no crew casualties. The SEAL team took no casualties. The Viet Cong forces took an estimated 40 casualties. The survivors withdrew. A follow-up sweep by earthen forces the next day found 14 bodies. All had been hit by .50 caliber fire. The description in the earthen report noted that multiple bodies had been nearly severed by the impacts. The force of the rounds hitting flesh at close range was creating wounds that were not survivable even with immediate medical attention. Example 3. August 1969. I Corps area. A Marine convoy was ambushed on Route 9 near Khe Sanh. The convoy included 3 gun trucks. Each gun truck had 2 M2 machine guns. The ambush was initiated by command-detonated mines that disabled the lead vehicle. Then RPG and automatic weapons fire from both sides of the road. The gun trucks maneuvered to the flanks and engaged the ambush positions with .50 caliber fire. The North Vietnamese were positioned in a tree line approximately 200 meters from the road. Standard ambush positioning. The trees provided concealment and some cover from rifle fire. The .50 caliber guns engaged the tree line systematically, starting at one end, walking fire through the entire line. The trees did not provide cover. Rounds were penetrating trunks, hitting soldiers behind the trees. continuing through and hitting soldiers further back. The North Vietnamese withdrew after approximately 5 minutes. The convoy sustained 4 casualties, all wounded, none killed. The gun trucks took multiple hits but remained operational. A prisoner captured 3 weeks later during an unrelated operation was identified as having participated in the ambush. His interrogation report described the experience. He stated that his unit had been told to expect a standard Marine convoy with rifle-armed soldiers. They had not been briefed that the convoy would include gun trucks with .50 caliber weapons. When the guns opened fire, he stated that soldiers around him began dying immediately. He could hear the rounds impacting trees and soldiers. He described the sound as continuous. He stated that he believed he would die if he remained in position. He withdrew without orders. Approximately half of his platoon was killed or wounded. He did not know the exact number because many of the wounded were left behind during the withdrawal. These 3 examples represent a pattern documented in hundreds of engagements across Vietnam. Vietnamese forces attempting to use cover that would have protected them from rifle or light machine gun fire discovered that the cover was inadequate against .50 caliber. The psychological effect was cumulative. Each engagement reinforced the lesson. The Americans had a weapon that changed the rules. Part 5. The psychological impact and failed adaptations. The psychological effect of the M2 on Vietnamese forces was documented in multiple sources: prisoner interrogations, captured documents, defector statements. The pattern is consistent. The weapon created fear disproportionate to its actual lethality because it violated the tactical assumptions soldiers relied on for survival. A soldier's ability to function in combat depends on his belief that he can influence his survival through his actions. Take cover, and you reduce your chance of being hit. Maintain distance, and you reduce the enemy's accuracy. Use terrain intelligently, and you can maneuver without being detected. These beliefs are essential. Without them, soldiers cannot make tactical decisions. They freeze or panic. The M2 violated these beliefs. Cover did not work. Distance did not create safety beyond the weapon's effective range, which was further than most Vietnamese weapons could accurately engage. Terrain features that should have provided concealment, like tree lines or berms, were penetrated. Soldiers who believed they were safe discovered they were not. This created a specific type of fear, not the generalized fear of combat. A targeted fear of a specific weapon. Prisoners interrogated after engagements involving .50 caliber fire consistently described the weapon in terms that suggested psychological trauma: the sound, the visual effect of rounds hitting nearby, the knowledge that any cover they used might not protect them. Vietnamese forces attempted to adapt. The adaptations failed because they were based on trying to counter the weapon using tactics designed for conventional machine guns. First adaptation: increase distance, engage American positions from ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. This reduced the .50 caliber's accuracy but not its psychological effect. Soldiers knew the weapon could reach them even at extended range, and American forces usually had artillery and air support that could engage targets at any range. Increasing distance did not create safety. Second adaptation: use harder cover, concrete, masonry, thick earth berms. This worked to some extent. A .50 caliber round could penetrate typical cover but not all cover. However, hard cover of sufficient thickness was not available in most tactical situations. Soldiers ambushing convoys or assaulting firebases did not have access to concrete bunkers. They used vegetation and terrain, and those did not work. Third adaptation: accept higher casualties and press the attack. This was attempted in several large-scale assaults, most notably during the Tet Offensive. The theory was that even with .50 caliber casualties, a large enough force could overwhelm defensive positions through numbers. The results were mixed. Some positions were overrun, but the casualty rates were significantly higher when defenders had .50 caliber support. The psychological effect of watching the assault waves being shredded by fire that could not be effectively suppressed degraded the cohesion of follow-on waves. Fourth adaptation: avoid engagements where the Americans had .50 caliber support. This was the most common adaptation. Intelligence reports identifying American units with heavy weapons would result in Vietnamese commanders choosing not to engage. Ambushes would be aborted if gun trucks were identified in the convoy. Assaults on firebases would be cancelled if reconnaissance identified .50 caliber positions. This adaptation worked in the sense that it reduced casualties, but it also meant ceding the initiative to the Americans. Vietnamese forces that avoided engagements because of American firepower superiority were not controlling the battlefield, they were reacting to American capabilities. Part 6. The industrial system behind the firepower. There is a question that needs to be examined. Why could the Americans deploy .50 caliber machine guns so widely when the Vietnamese could not deploy equivalent weapons? The answer is not tactical. It is industrial. The M2 Browning was designed in 1921. By 1965, the United States had been manufacturing the weapon and its ammunition for over 40 years. The manufacturing was industrialized, multiple factories, standardized parts, mass production. The weapons were being produced in thousands per year. The ammunition was being produced in millions of rounds per year. The logistics system to support the weapon was mature. Ammunition could be transported by ship, aircraft, or ground vehicle to any location in Vietnam. Supply chains were established. Depots were positioned throughout South Vietnam. Units could requisition ammunition and receive it within days. In some cases, within hours if the tactical situation required it. The result was that .50 caliber ammunition was effectively unlimited from the perspective of the units employing the weapons. A gun truck could fire 1,000 rounds in an engagement and have the ammunition resupplied the next day. A firebase could fire 5,000 rounds during a defense and be resupplied within a week. There was no ammunition constraint that forced American commanders to ration .50 caliber fire. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong had no equivalent industrial base. They relied on weapons and ammunition supplied by the Soviet Union and China. The Soviets manufactured the DSJK heavy machine gun, 12.7 mm, comparable to the M2 in terms of ballistics. But the supply was limited. The DSJK was supplied to North Vietnamese army units. Very few made it to Viet Cong forces in the south, and the ammunition supply was constrained. Units that had DSJK weapons were instructed to conserve ammunition. They could not fire 1,000 rounds in a single engagement and expect resupply the next day. This created an asymmetry. American units could use .50 caliber fire liberally. Vietnamese units that had equivalent weapons had to use them sparingly. The result was that in most engagements the Americans had heavy machine gun support and the Vietnamese did not. This was not a tactical failure on the part of Vietnamese commanders. It was an industrial reality. The United States had the manufacturing capacity to produce weapons and ammunition in quantities that the North Vietnamese could not match. And that industrial capacity translated directly into battlefield superiority. Part 7. The verdict. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun did not win the Vietnam War. The war was lost for political and strategic reasons that had nothing to do with small arms superiority. But the M2 changed the tactical environment in ways that shocked Vietnamese forces and forced them to adapt their operations. For 20 years, the Viet Minh, Viet Cong, and North Vietnamese army had developed tactics based on fighting French and ARVN forces equipped with conventional machine guns. Those tactics assumed that cover would provide protection. That distance would create safety beyond 800 meters. That machine guns were area suppression weapons, not precision destruction weapons. The M2 invalidated those assumptions. Cover that stopped rifle rounds did not stop .50 caliber rounds. Distance up to 1,800 meters did not create safety. The weapon was not just suppressing areas, it was destroying targets, trees, bunkers, vehicles, and soldiers. The psychological effect was disproportionate to the weapon's actual lethality. The M2 was not the weapon that killed the most Vietnamese soldiers. That distinction goes to artillery and airstrikes. But the M2 created a specific fear because it violated the basic tactical assumptions soldiers relied on. It made soldiers question whether the actions they took to protect themselves were effective. And that uncertainty is psychologically devastating. Vietnamese forces adapted by avoiding engagements where they would face .50 caliber fire. This was tactically sound, but it also meant ceding control of the battlefield to American forces. Roads could be traveled by convoys with gun trucks. Rivers could be patrolled by boats with .50 caliber guns. Firebases with .50 caliber perimeter defense could not be overrun without accepting casualties that were operationally unsustainable. The industrial system that supported the M2 was as important as the weapon itself. The Americans could fire .50 caliber ammunition in quantities that seemed unlimited to Vietnamese observers. Units that expended thousands of rounds in a single engagement would be resupplied within days. This created a firepower advantage that the North Vietnamese could not match because their supply chain could not deliver equivalent quantities of heavy machine gun ammunition. This is what industrial warfare looks like when one side has the manufacturing capacity to produce weapons and ammunition in mass quantities and the other side does not. The weapon itself, the M2, was designed in 1921. It was not new technology, but the system that supported it, the factories producing millions of rounds per year, the logistics delivering those rounds to every corner of South Vietnam, the doctrine that encouraged liberal use of firepower, was a system the North Vietnamese could not replicate. Vietnamese soldiers who survived engagements with .50 caliber fire described it in their reports and interrogations with a consistent theme. The Americans had brought a level of firepower to the battlefield that made conventional infantry tactics suicidal. Cover did not work. Distance did not work. Numbers did not work unless the numbers were large enough to accept catastrophic casualties, and the psychological effect of knowing that the weapon that had killed your comrades was mounted on every American vehicle, boat and firebase was cumulative. By the time Tran wrote his report after the PBR engagement in March 1967, there were thousands of similar reports circulating through Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army command structures, all describing the same weapon, all reaching the same conclusion. The Americans have a machine gun that changes the tactical calculus. We have no counter for it. Avoid engagement when possible. Accept higher casualties when engagement is unavoidable. The M2 did not win the war, but it won engagements, and it created a psychological shadow that followed Vietnamese forces throughout the conflict. The knowledge that at any moment, from any direction, they might encounter fire from a weapon that could kill them through the cover they were hiding behind. That uncertainty, that fear, was the M2's most devastating effect. Not the rounds it fired, the belief it created that nowhere was safe. If your father or grandfather served in Vietnam and used the M2 or encountered it, I want to hear about it in the comments. What unit was he with? What did he tell you about the weapon? The official histories record the specifications and employment. The comments record what it felt like to fire it or face it. Those details matter. Write them down. They deserve to be preserved.